We don't know exactly when the next explosive news day will be for the Trump administration, but if rhythm means anything, it's not more than a day or two away. That's how fast and furiously, devastatingly negative news stories are being broken by the Washington Post and the New York Times on the Trump administration. There is a massive news day that has now been scheduled, probably for next month, sometime after Memorial Day. That is when the Senate Intelligence Committee will hear public testimony from the Donald Trump-fired FBI Director James Comey. James Comey was invited to testify to the Senate Judiciary Committee also, but he declined. The Judiciary Committee issued a bipartisan statement from Republican Chairman Chuck Grassley and the Democratic Senator Dianne Feinstein, senior Democrat on the committee, saying, "We're extremely disappointed in James Comey's decision not to testify voluntarily before the Judiciary Committee. There is no reason he can't testify before both the Intelligence and Judiciary Committees." And that's true. James Comey could testify to both committees. So why isn't he? Why is he picking the Senate Intelligence Committee over the Senate Judiciary Committee, which actually has jurisdiction over the FBI and the Justice Department? The reason is the Senate Judiciary Committee is frequently a partisan circus compared to the Senate Intelligence Committee. The Senate Judiciary Committee has 20 members. The Intelligence Committee has only 15. That means there are 11 Republicans on the Senate Judiciary Committee and only 8 Republicans on the Senate Intelligence Committee. The Senate Judiciary Committee has a large group of Republican senators who don't want to focus on the real issues that James Comey is there to testify about. James Comey knows that Ted Cruz on the Senate Judiciary Committee, and John Cornyn and Orrin Hatch on the Judiciary Committee, and Chuck Grassley on the Judiciary Committee, and Senator Kennedy of Louisiana on the Judiciary Committee would once again reliably push whatever Trump talking points they think will work that day. Ted Cruz is not on the Intelligence Committee. Chuck Grassley is not on the Intelligence Committee. John Cornyn is the only Republican member of Judiciary who's also on the Intelligence Committee. And so James Comey has looked at the membership of the committees, Judiciary Committee and the Intelligence Committee, and he has decided to go with what looks to him like the committee with more intelligence. And James Comey knows that in his case, testifying once about these matters is the most effective and the most professional way for him to tell his story. James Comey knows that he has a responsibility to the investigation that's going on, a responsibility to the public, and a responsibility to the Senate. And though it might be fun for us to listen to him tell his story over and over again, James Comey knows that the investigation will be best served if he tells his story once in a clear and efficient way and then steps off the stage and lets the investigation continue. When he testifies, it is possible that we will get access to his notes, the notes that James Comey made of his conversations with the president, notes that we know contain stunningly incriminating quotes by the president. We also now know that the investigation will soon be collecting some stunningly incriminating notes taken in the Oval Office by the Trump administration, quoting what the president said to Russian officials in the Oval Office about the firing of FBI Director James Comey. The New York Times reports today that the president told the Russian ambassador and the Russian foreign minister that, quote, firing the FBI Director James B. Comey had relieved great pressure on him, according to a document summarizing the meeting. "I just fired the head of the FBI. He was crazy, a real nut job," Mr. Trump said, according to the document, which was read to the New York Times by an American official. "I faced great pressure because of Russia. That's taken off," Mr. Trump added. "I'm not under investigation." The White House did not dispute that account of what President Trump said in the Oval Office to the Russians. Once again, not to be outdone by the New York Times, the Washington Post reported late today, quote, "The law enforcement investigation into possible coordination between Russia and the Trump campaign has identified a current White House official as a significant person of interest, showing that the probe is reaching into the highest levels of government, according to people familiar with the matter. The senior White House advisor under scrutiny by investigators is someone close to the president, according to these people, who would not further identify the official." The Washington Post also reports today that, quote, the revelation comes as the investigation appears to be entering a more overtly active phase, with investigators shifting from work that has remained largely hidden from the public to conducting interviews and using a grand jury to issue subpoenas. The intensity of the probe is expected to accelerate in the coming weeks, people said. So this story that has been moving as fast as we thought it could is going to accelerate, according to that report. And now Politico reports that President Trump has told several people that he regrets firing his national security advisor, Michael Flynn. I was kind of stunned, one person said. I asked him, you fired him already. What are you going to do? Joining us now, Nicholas Kristof, Pulitzer Prize-winning columnist for the New York Times, Michael Isikoff, chief investigative reporter for Yahoo News, and Jill Wine-Banks, former assistant Watergate special prosecutor and former general counsel of the Army. And Nick, I am really struck by that last quote in Politico, because it's a rare kind of unnamed quote. It's a person saying, here is exactly what I personally said to the President of the United States. And so the President, if that is true, if the person said that to him, the President knows who gave that quote to Politico.
Which underscores the degree to which people are fleeing and are astonished. But, I mean, you know, just at the fundamental level, it's an astonishing thing to say, because you know, Michael Flynn was not only woefully unprepared for the job, but he lied to the vice president. We now have reports today that U.S. had picked up conversations among Russian officials that they thought that Mike Flynn could be used to sway the president. I mean, there's just one thing after another, and to regret firing him, I mean, it really does stray into the delusional area. You just wonder what on earth he was thinking.
Yeah, I mean, I wish that unnamed quote was, why do you regret? And that person actually got an answer. Jill, I want to go to the notes that are now being revealed of that meeting. And these are White House notes. There are note takers in these kinds of meetings, and someone has basically released these notes to the media, showing that the president is not only talking to the Russians about firing James Comey in what sounds like a bit of a brag, but also he makes a very specific reference to James Comey's investigation of the Russian connection to Trump world when he's talking about firing him. Does this take us closer to, or does this somehow inform an obstruction of justice possibility with the president on the firing of James Comey?
I think the cumulative evidence of there being a legal obstruction of justice is overwhelming, and this certainly tops off the cake, so to speak. It is clear that he was interfering with the investigation in many ways, and the changing stories are very interesting, because when that happens, it's usually evidence of guilt. It is indicative of his guilt that he started out with one excuse for why he fired him, and then went on television and gave a second, and now he's in the White House saying something to the Russians that is clearly inculpatory of him.
And Michael Isikoff, Senator Patrick Leahy, a career-long member of the Senate Judiciary Committee, former prosecutor himself, tweeted this today. He said, "This is what obstruction looks like," quoting Trump, "I faced great pressure because of Russia. That's taken off."
Yeah, and actually one of the more significant developments came during Rod Rosenstein's closed-door testimony before all House members today, in which he was asked a lot of questions about the circumstances of that memo he wrote that justified the firing of Jim Comey. And Rosenstein said, "I believed what I wrote, I stood by it," but you know, a number of members pressed him on how he came to write the memo. Was he asked to write the memo? What reason was he given for writing the memo? And he declined repeatedly to answer those questions, and the response he gave is because that may be something of interest to the special counsel, i.e. Bob Mueller. And that's pretty much a confirmation that a cover-up obstruction is within the orbit of the things that Bob Mueller is looking at. Like, was that memo written for, did the president instruct him to write it for particular reasons? And you put it together from what we know Comey has said and the memo he wrote about the request he got from President Trump to back off the investigation, to make it go away, and you put it together with the new disclosures about what he said to the Russian Foreign Minister Lavrov, to the effect of he fired Comey to relieve the pressure of the Russia investigation, and you have the ingredients of a potential obstruction case.
Nick, to whatever extent viewers of this segment right now are outraged by the president's conduct, or political enemies of the president are outraged by his conduct, obviously people working within the Trump administration are outraged by his conduct. That's why they're reading the notes of an Oval Office meeting over the phone to reporters.
Well, I mean, two things are going on. One is that there are an awful lot of officials in the government who are aghast at everything that Trump stands for, and I think have been nervous that he is going to get away with obstructing justice. And so they have, I would say patriotically, tried to reach out with that information so it cannot be suppressed. And the other element is that even among Trump aides, those who he appointed, there are fierce wars, and so they are leaking information selectively to make themselves look good and to look others look bad. You know, and I think one of the larger questions is that we all, I think, have a reasonable faith that Bob Mueller is going to do a good job investigating. That is going to take a long time, and that is going to be a very secret process. And we also do need a transparent process to look at the integrity of our political system. And Bob Mueller is not going to provide that. And so I hope that we're going to also have some kind of a congressional or independent commission that can provide that transparency, which I think as a country we need.
Jill, if there is no independent commission of that sort, what would you expect from Special Counsel Mueller in terms of public revelations? Go to the extreme case, for example, where there are absolutely no indictments, there's no criminal charges, so he doesn't have a courtroom forum with which to reveal some of what he's discovered. But he's conducted this investigation, and the country's wondering, as they were in the case of Hillary Clinton's email, and James Comey made that decision to talk about that. Would you expect Bob Mueller to make some kind of decision like that and disclose something?
From everything I know about him, it's unlikely that he is going to do anything other than return indictments if the evidence warrants it. There is a provision in the law that you can make a report, and it is what we did during Watergate. On the day we returned indictments, we also asked the judge for permission to give to the Congress a report which laid out a roadmap to impeachment. It put together all of the tapes and evidence that we had and what we thought were impeachable offenses by the president. And so that is something that can be done through the court system. But I think that we had underlying criminal indictments in which the president was an unindicted co-conspirator. If indeed there's a conclusion that there are absolutely no violations of law, I'm not sure that that would be an appropriate thing. I think right now what we're looking for is, what is the smoking gun of this particular case? And there are so many possibilities as to what it might be. You know, is it his statements to the Russians that he's got the pressure off because he's fired Comey? Is it the fact that he fired Comey? Is it the fact that Comey has all these memos that say that I was asked to turn off the investigation of Flynn? I mean, there's a number of possible things that could turn the public against the president and lead to further action. And so I think we have to look for what is that particular smoking gun. In Watergate, of course, it was the tape in which the president is saying we can use the CIA to stop the FBI. We don't want them to follow the money trail. And here there's the same thing. I'd like to follow the money and see if there's a Russian connection between the Trump organization. That seems to be something that may explain the affinity that the president has for Russia and for Flynn. We need to know those things.
And Michael, quickly before we go, as we saw in the transcripts of the Nixon tapes, Some of these sentences are not very clear, simple declarative sentences that actually got him impeached. And you see that in what we're hearing about the way Donald Trump talks. There is some room for a certain amount of interpretation, and the White House is still desperately trying to spin those interpretations in its favor.
Yeah, and look, at this point, we've only read about excerpts from the Comey memo, from the meeting with Lavrov. We haven't seen the full documents. We haven't heard witness testimony from any of those who were present. So we're way premature. And just sort of picking up on the point that you were discussing with Jill, I mean, there is a downside to the Mueller special counsel in terms of public information. Look, Eric Holder, when he was Attorney General, appointed John Durham to investigate the torture by CIA. He spent 2 years in investigation. More than that, never produced a public report. It was all covered by grand jury. If Bob Mueller uses a grand jury, we may never see, just like with the Durham torture report, we may never see anything beyond whatever criminal cases he brought.
We're going to fit in a quick break here. Jill Wine-Banks and Nicholas Kristof, thank you for joining us tonight. Really appreciate it.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me, or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.